16 seconds, sound suppression water system has been activated, protecting Discovery and the launch pad from acoustical energy. We have a go for main engine start. T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery, hoisting harmony to the heavens and opening new gateways for international science. Discovery has cleared the tower.
For thousands of years, mankind has looked toward space, but it's been less than a century since we could actually travel there.
Discovery's roll maneuver is complete.
A few centuries ago, almost all scientists believed in the biblical account of creation. However, by the time the first astronaut launched into space, many scientists had abandoned this history. Many astronomers had come to believe that our solar system and the planets and moons within it formed all by themselves without a creator about 4.5 billion years ago. But what did we find when we arrived in space? Do the planets and moons of our solar system actually support this belief? Or are they consistent with the Bible instead? The answer to this question might surprise you. Welcome to What You Aren't Being Told About Astronomy, Volume 1, Our Created Solar System. I'm Psarris, your host. For a number of years, I worked as an engineer in the U.S. military space program. I entered that program as an atheist and an evolutionist. I left it as a creationist and a Christian. In this video, you'll discover some of the evidences that have convinced me, along with many others, that the Bible is true and evolution is not. I'll be your guide as we tour the solar system together. We'll see stunning pictures and movies of planets, moons, and other objects. Some are our next-door neighbors in space. Others are vast distances away. We'll discover that often these objects do not support evolutionary ideas. Many of them appear to be quite young, not billions of years old. In fact, according to the current evolutionary models, many of the objects in our solar system cannot exist at all. Now that probably contradicts everything you've heard before. You've probably been told that evolutionary astronomers have it all figured out, and that their models prove that our solar system formed all by itself billions of years ago. Well, you'll have to hear the evidence and judge for yourself. In this video, you'll discover what you're not being told about our solar system. So let's get started. Before we can talk about how our solar system got here, we need to clarify exactly what the solar system is. When we talk about the solar system, we're talking about our sun and everything that orbits around it. This includes the 8 major planets in our solar system, along with many moons, asteroids, comets, and some smaller objects as well. By the way, this diagram is not to scale. In this video, we'll be discussing all the planets and some of their moons in our solar system. In order from the sun, the planets are Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto is a special case that we'll be discussing later. Here's what the planets would look like if you could line them all up next to the sun. In real life, the planets are much farther away from the sun and each other than this, but I wanted to show you how big the planets are compared to each other and the sun. By the way, you are here. So where did the system come from? There are 2 competing models for the origin of our solar system. This is a pretty straightforward issue. Either the solar system was created, or it wasn't. In this video, I'm going to use the word evolution to describe the belief that our solar system was not created. This word is often used to describe biological evolution, of course, but astronomers commonly use it in a broader meaning as well. So when I use the word evolution, I'm not talking about plants or animals. I'm talking about the belief that our solar system, and everything in it, formed and developed all by itself. I used to believe in evolution, but not anymore. I now believe that the entire universe, and everything in it, including our solar system, was created by God as described in the Bible. Of course, many scientists today disagree strongly with this idea. These men and women believe that no creation occurred. They believe that the solar system formed billions of years ago without a creator being involved. In this video, you'll discover why their model is wrong. Of course, this won't prove that the creation model is right. It's impossible to use science to prove any historical event happened. All we can do is see which scenario fits the evidence the best. And that's what this video is all about. Most people have been told that all the evidence points toward evolution. As we tour the solar system together, ask yourself this question. Are the planets and moons consistent with these evolutionary ideas or not? I think you'll see that the answer is no. I think you'll see that the evidence is perfectly consistent with the creation viewpoint instead. So let's discuss these two opposing models. The creation model is based on the Bible. The Bible says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." The Bible doesn't give us a specific date for this event, but from other passages in the Bible, we can calculate that this would have been about 6,000 years ago. On the other hand, someone who believes in evolution denies the biblical account. The dominant evolutionary model today is called the solar nebula model. According to this model, our solar system formed from a swirling cloud of gas and dust about 4.5 to 4.6 billion years ago. The evolutionary story goes something like this. In the beginning, there was gas. About 4.6 billion years ago, an enormous cloud of gas collapsed and started to swirl. Most of the gas went into the middle and became our sun. The rest of it swirled around the new sun and started to condense into grains of dust. As the grains of dust orbited the sun, they started to stick together and became clumps of dust. Then the clumps stuck together to become little rocks. The little rocks stuck together to become big rocks. After enough time had passed, the gas had turned into huge asteroids. These asteroids stuck together to become the planets we see today. Astronomers have a special name for these asteroids. They're called planetesimals, which means little planets. Since you probably haven't heard this word before, I'm going to call them asteroids instead. It means basically the same thing anyway. For example, most secular astronomers believe that the asteroids we see in our solar system today are leftover planetesimals that never quite got it together to form planets. Evolutionists are confident that their model is correct. After all, it explains why all the planets orbit the sun in the same direction. It also explains why the solar system is flat today, with all the planets lining up in a disk shape as they orbit the sun. Plus, it explains why the inner planets are rocky, and the outer planets are made of gas and ice. Supposedly, the heavier rocky materials were able to condense close to the sun, while the lighter materials were more volatile and could only condense further away from the sun. Sounds good, doesn't it? The problem is that it doesn't work. It turns out that you can't build planets like the evolutionists say. You can build clumps of dust, certainly. We know that dust particles stick together. Just look under your furniture and see the dust bunnies there for proof. Well, experiments in space have shown that dust bunnies will form in a vacuum, too. The problem is that once you have big clumps of dust, and maybe even some small pebbles, they don't grow together anymore. They start impacting each other too fast to stick together. Instead, they start breaking each other up in the collisions. Gravity isn't strong enough to overcome this until after the rocks have formed into small asteroids. So, despite the fancy computer animations you see on science videos, there's no way to get from dust clumps to planets. Evolutionary astronomers know this is true. That's why you see quotes like this one in the astronomy textbooks. Once these planetesimals have been formed, further growth of planets may occur through the gravitational accretion into large bodies. Just how that takes place is not understood. So before we even discuss any planets or moons, the evolutionary theory is breaking down already. It can't produce the asteroids it needs to build the planets. Will it do any better when we examine the actual planets and moons themselves? Let's take a look and see. We'll start our tour with the planet that's closest to the Sun, Mercury. Mercury is the first of the 4 terrestrial planets. The others are Venus, Earth, and Mars. The word terrestrial comes from terra, the Latin name for Earth. Unlike the large gas planets, Earth is mostly rock. Since Mercury, Venus, and Mars are also rocky, we call them the terrestrial planets. Mercury is tiny. It's a little bigger than our moon, but smaller than some of the other moons in our solar system. It's also a planet of extremes. Since it's so close to the Sun, the temperatures on Mercury can reach about 800 degrees Fahrenheit, more than enough to melt lead. On the dark side, temperatures can plunge to 200 degrees below zero. Mercury's surface resembles our moon. It's heavily cratered, as you can see here. Most of what we know about Mercury comes from the Mariner 10 space probe, which flew by Mercury in 1974 and 1975. We don't yet have pictures for all of Mercury's surface. In this mosaic, the white stripe on the top is a blank spot where we don't have photographs. It isn't actually on Mercury itself. Mercury causes serious problems for evolutionary theories. First of all, we've learned that Mercury is very dense. So dense, in fact, that most scientists believe it has an iron core occupying over 40% of its volume. We don't know for sure that this exact core structure is there, but we do know how dense the planet is. We know this because we've measured Mercury's gravitational pull on our spacecraft. There's a lot of material packed into a small amount of space. This causes a huge problem for evolution. Evolutionary models say Mercury can't be this dense, not even close. Here's how one evolutionist astronomer explains it. The driving force behind previous attempts to account for Mercury has been to fit the high density of the planet into some preferred overall solar system scheme. It has become clear that none of these proposed models work, and the high density is conveniently accommodated by the large impact hypothesis, which makes Mercury unique. Okay, so this problem is solved by the large impact hypothesis. What is that exactly? Well, evolutionists believe that Mercury did actually form in the way evolution predicts. But then, this happened. Do you remember all those asteroids that were supposedly flying around in our early solar system, turning into planets? Well, after Mercury formed in the correct way, the way that evolution expects, one of those asteroids crashed into Mercury and stripped away all the lighter material from it. The lighter stuff just went away into space somewhere, leaving behind the dense material that we see in the planet today. But where's the proof for this event? Only that if it didn't happen, Mercury would disprove evolution. Obviously, this isn't a good standard of proof. But that's not all. Evolutionists received another rude jolt when Mariner flew by Mercury and discovered this little planet has a magnetic field. But according to evolution, it can't have a magnetic field. To understand why this is important, we need to talk about magnetic fields for a moment. There are several reasons why a planet could have a magnetic field, but most of them require the planet to be young. Since evolutionists believe that the planets are all billions of years old, this means there can be only one source of magnetism for the planets, a dynamo deep inside each planet. A dynamo means there is hot, liquid metal moving around inside each planet. As it flows, an electrical current is produced, which creates a magnetic field. This is a complicated process, so I won't bore you with details. The important thing for now is this. In order for a planet to still have a magnetic field after billions of years, it has to have a liquid core. But as one evolutionist has pointed out, Mercury is so small that the general opinion is that the planet should have frozen solid eons ago. Therefore, according to evolution, Mercury can't have a liquid core, so it can't have a magnetic field. But it does have a magnetic field. How do evolutionists deal with this problem? One popular idea is that Mercury doesn't have a pure iron core. Instead, it has some sulfur mixed into the iron. This would prevent it from freezing and allow Mercury to have a magnetic field today. But this creates a much bigger problem for evolution. The nebula theory says that volatile elements like sulfur can't have condensed this close to the sun. So, in trying to rescue Mercury for the evolutionary theory, the entire theory itself is being undermined. So here's what you aren't being told about Mercury. Evolution says it can't be dense, but it is. Evolution says it can't have a magnetic field, but it does. And trying to rescue evolution from the facts is just making the problem worse. Mercury is a tiny planet, but it causes huge problems for evolution. As it says in 1 Corinthians 1:27, God has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. Venus is not the closest planet to the Sun, but it is the hottest. Venus is completely covered with clouds. These clouds are mostly carbon dioxide. This traps the Sun's heat and causes a massive greenhouse effect. Temperatures on Venus approach 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Beneath its clouds, Venus looks like this. Venus is not a nice place to visit. If you were to go there and could somehow survive the heat, which you couldn't, and could somehow breathe the air, which you shouldn't, you'd immediately die anyway. You'd be crushed by the 90 atmospheres of pressure. At Venus's surface, the pressure is the same as being 3,000 feet deep under the ocean on Earth. Venus poses many unique challenges to evolution. Scientists used to call Venus our sister planet, which makes sense. After all, Venus is about the same size and mass as the Earth, and is made up of the same stuff. According to evolution, Venus was formed by the same processes as the Earth was, at the same time, in about the same place, and from the same materials. Therefore, Venus should be very similar to Earth, but in the last few decades, we've learned that Venus is actually very different. First of all, we've discovered that Venus's surface is not at all what evolutionists expected. Venus looks like the biblical description of Hades. There's no water anywhere. Instead, the entire planet is covered with lava flows. It does rain sometimes, but the rain isn't water. It's sulfuric acid. Also, Venus seems to have no tectonic plates. The Earth's crust is made up of many plates, but Venus's isn't. Venus has no magnetic field either, while the Earth does. If evolution says the planets are supposed to be so much alike, then why are they so different? For that matter, why doesn't Venus have a moon? Later in this video, we'll talk about how the Earth supposedly got its moon. For now, we'll ask, if both planets really did form at the same time, by the same processes, from the same materials, and at about the same place, why doesn't Venus have a moon too? Well, an evolutionary theory explains this. Supposedly, Venus did have a moon initially, as evolutionary models would expect, but then, something happened. Yes, that's right. An asteroid came along and hit it, and destroyed Venus's moon. Where's the evidence for this, though? There isn't any. Only that if it didn't happen, Venus would pose problems for evolutionary theory. Venus poses other huge problems for evolution as well. For example, Venus's surface appears quite young. The entire surface appears to be fresh. There's no record anywhere of billions of years of erosion or chemical weathering. Evolutionists are forced to speculate that somehow, for some unknown reason, the entire planet was resurfaced by volcanic activity not that long ago. This means the entire planet's crust would be submerged under lava all at the same time. Why did this happen? Nobody knows. How did this happen? Nobody knows that either. But it must have happened, they say, because we know evolution is true. How long ago did this event supposedly happen? Most planetary scientists believe Venus was resurfaced about 500 million years ago. They believe this because Venus has about 1,000 large impact craters on its surface, and it would take 500 million years or so to accumulate this many craters. So even though they admit Venus's surface looks young, they will insist that it's at least 500 million years old. But they're making two big assumptions here. Number one, they're assuming they know how often new craters form today. And number two, they're assuming this rate has been the same for at least 500 million years. However, both of these assumptions have been shown to be invalid. Studies on our moon and elsewhere in the solar system have shown that the evolutionary cratering model is wrong. We'll talk more about that later in this video. We see then that even though evolutionists insist Venus is old, all the evidence we have makes it look quite young. So here's what you aren't being told about Venus. Evolution says it should be similar to Earth, but it has no moon, no magnetic field, and its crust and its surface are very different than Earth's. Its surface is young and fresh, and Venus is perfectly consistent with a solar system that's only thousands of years old, not billions. The Earth is obviously very special to us. It's our home. Evolutionists tell us that our home has been here for about 4.5 billion years. But there's a lot of evidence that says this can't be true, that the Earth was created just a few thousand years ago, as the Bible says. In fact, there's enough evidence to fill multiple videos like this one. So a later video in this series will focus exclusively on the age of the Earth. For now, we'll have to reluctantly set this topic aside and move on. Let's talk instead about the Earth as a planet. Other than its age, does it match evolutionary theories? No, in many ways it doesn't. First of all, Earth's magnetic field causes all sorts of problems for evolution. Our magnetic field looks sort of like the field that would be generated if there was a giant bar magnet inside the Earth. Of course, there is no bar magnet inside of our planet. So where does the field come from? We've already discussed how magnetic fields are supposedly generated by fluid motions inside the planets. We've also discussed how this idea doesn't necessarily work, especially for Mercury. Well, it's hard to make it work for the Earth too, even though the Earth is the planet it was invented to explain. The American Geophysical Union website quotes a study that says this: "The mechanism for generating the geomagnetic field remains one of the central unsolved problems in geoscience." An even bigger problem, though, is that our magnetic field is decaying. For as long as we've been measuring it, its energy has fallen continuously. It loses half its energy about every 1400 years or so. Now, you might have heard that the Earth's magnetic field has flipped in the past, that north and south magnetic poles have swapped. That's true, but it's not what we're talking about here. We aren't talking about the strength of the field at any one place on the Earth. We're talking about all the energy in the field overall, and that energy is fading fast. Since it's getting weaker over time, this means it was stronger in the past. If you could travel backwards in time, the field would double its energy every 1400 years you traveled. Of course, there's a definite limit on how strong it could possibly have been. It turns out that the Earth's magnetic field could only be tens of thousands of years old at the most, not thousands of millions. Oh, and evolutionary dynamo theories can't explain any of this, of course. That's why one evolutionist recently wrote, "Magnetism is almost as much of a puzzle now as it was when William Gilbert wrote his classic text concerning magnetism, magnetic bodies, and the great magnet Earth in 1600. So, despite 400 years of research, evolutionists can't figure out how the Earth could possibly have a magnetic field. Maybe we should just accept that our planet was created? In fact, our planet looks like it was created especially for us. The Earth is uniquely designed to be our home. First of all, the magnetic field that evolutionists can't explain has a very important function. It protects us from solar radiation, which would quickly kill life on Earth otherwise. Charged particles from the sun are deflected around and behind us instead. Not only that, our atmosphere nurtures us and gives us air to breathe. A thicker atmosphere, or one with a different composition, could produce a massive greenhouse effect instead. Next, the Earth rotates on its axis once every 24 hours. This again is a unique feature for us. If the Earth rotated too slowly, there would be extreme temperature changes on our planet. If it rotated too quickly, we would experience violent winds. But it rotates at just the right speed. Also, our planet's axis is tilted by 23.5 degrees. This gives us moderate seasons. Plus, the Earth's orbit is nice and circular. This gives us a stable climate. But none of this should surprise us. The Bible says in Isaiah 45:18 that God created the earth for us to live here. "For thus says the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He has established it. He created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is none else." There's another very important feature of our home planet. 70% of its surface is covered in water. We don't appreciate just how much water there is here, but from certain angles, like this one, looking at the Pacific Ocean, it's hard to see any land at all. In fact, it's hard to even comprehend how much water is here. The ocean basins are miles deep in some places. Question: if you could raise the ocean bottoms up and squish all the mountains down so that the entire Earth's surface was perfectly smooth, then obviously the water in the oceans would spread out to cover the entire Earth. But how deep would this water be? The answer is over 1.5 miles. There's a tremendous amount of water here, more than enough to flood the entire planet if only the Earth's surface was a bit smoother. So next time you read in the Bible about Noah's flood, remember how much water there is. Skeptics often scoff and say, if there was a global flood, where did all the water go? Well, they can just go down to the ocean and look at it. It's still there. Even the Earth's mountains used to be underwater, as the evolutionists themselves admit. That's why we find marine fossils on mountaintops. But at the end of the flood, the ocean basin sank and the mountains rose. That's why there's dry land today for us to live on. Anyway, back to our discussion about water. All this water is vital to life. But did you know that evolutionary models say that this water shouldn't be here? Remember how we discussed that volatile gases couldn't condense in the inner solar system? The evolutionary model says they were blown outwards instead. Evolutionists say this is why the terrestrial planets are rocky, because lighter materials couldn't condense this close to the sun. Well, one of the things that shouldn't have condensed this close to the sun is water. Evolutionary models say that the Earth had to form with practically no water at all. Obviously, that's not what we see. Where did all this water come from? Well, evolutionists don't know. They used to claim that the Earth was bombarded with hundreds of millions of comets early in its history. Since comets are basically big dirty ice balls in space, they said this is where all our water came from. Unfortunately for evolution, this explanation doesn't work anymore. We've actually sent spacecraft to visit some comets recently and found out exactly what these things are made of. It turns out that comets do contain some water, but a lot of their ices are chemically different than the water we have on Earth. Comet ices have a lot more deuterium than evolutionists expected. Since deuterium is extremely rare on Earth, apparently our water didn't come from comets. Therefore, according to evolution, our planet should have very little water. Obviously, evolution is wrong. As a report in Science News recently said, there's one thing on which most geochemists and astronomers agree. The celestial pantry is now empty of a key ingredient in the recipe for Earth. So here's what you aren't being told about the Earth. It's uniquely designed for us to live here. Its rotation period, axial tilt, orbit, atmosphere, and many other things. There's plenty of water here for Noah's flood, but evolution says there shouldn't be any here at all. And the Earth's magnetic field can't be billions of years old.
Engines on 5, 4, 3, 2. All engines running. Launch commenced. Liftoff. We have liftoff 49 minutes past the hour. Static reports the clock has started. The tower is clear.
The Apollo missions to the moon were probably the highlight of our entire space program so far. Thousands of people worked tirelessly for years so that 12 men could walk on the moon and return safely home. We've all seen the moon countless times. Often, we tend to take it for granted, and we don't appreciate its beauty. But there's much more to appreciate than just its beauty. Like the Earth, the moon was created and uniquely designed for us. First of all, the moon's gravity raises tides in the Earth's oceans. This is crucial to life on Earth. The moon's tides help to circulate ocean water, which prevents our oceans from becoming stagnant. This allows fish and other creatures to live there. The moon is at just the right distance for this. If it were much farther away, it wouldn't raise high enough tides. On the other hand, if it were much closer, the tides would be too high, and they would be harmful to us. But the moon was created for more than just tides. The Bible says the moon was created for signs and seasons for us here on Earth, and is uniquely positioned for this. As the moon goes around the Earth, it regularly passes between the Earth and the sun. When this happens, if you're at the right spot on the Earth, you can see an eclipse. Notice how the moon blocks out the sun exactly. The moon is 400 times smaller than the sun, but the sun is 400 times farther away than the moon. This makes these eclipses possible. As you see here, it also allows us to study parts of the sun's atmosphere, things that we couldn't see otherwise thanks to the sun's blinding light. A total eclipse is known to be one of the most awe-inspiring events in all of creation. Each time one occurs, people travel from all over the world to see it. There are well over 100 other moons in our solar system, yet none of them produce eclipses like this for the planets they orbit. Only our moon has the exact combination of size, position, and distance that produces these beautiful events.
We'll call you. Roger that.
Except for the Earth itself, the moon is the most widely studied object in our solar system. It's the only other object that people have walked on. The moon has some fascinating lessons to teach us. The side of the moon that we see from Earth is dominated by several features. The large dark areas that you see here on the surface are called maria. These are believed to be large flows of hardened lava. Here's a closer look. Notice how the mare area is smooth and lower than the rugged highlands behind it. The maria are believed to be huge impact basins. Sometime during the moon's past, some large objects hit the moon, forming these huge basins. These impacts were so severe that they cracked the moon's crust, causing lava to ooze out and fill the basins in. This seems like a reasonable explanation so far, but here's a question. How much time passed between the impacts and the lava coming out? It seems obvious that this wouldn't have taken long at all. A few hours, a few days, maybe as long as a week or two. But evolutionists believe that 500 million years passed in between the impacts and the lava. Why do they believe this? Because in many places on the moon, we can see things called ghost craters. Ghost craters are craters that are sticking up from underneath the maria. They have been partially filled in by lava, but not completely erased. That's why we can still see them. Here's another example. Notice that some craters are sharp and clear. These obviously formed after the lava filled in the maria, so these are not ghost craters. The ghost craters are the ones, like these, that are peeking up from underneath the hardened lava. These craters existed on the floors of the impact basins before the lava came and partially filled them. This means they formed after the giant impacts happened, but before the lava came out from the impacts. Here's why this is important. Because evolutionists believe in billions of years, they have concluded that, except for a short period early in the solar system's history, new craters form very slowly. Otherwise, there would be a lot more craters on the moon's maria, for example. But there are a lot of ghost craters on the moon. Since evolutionists have to believe in a slow rate of cratering, they're forced to believe that it took a good 500 million years or so for all these ghost craters to form. Does this idea make sense? No, it doesn't. Obviously, such huge impacts would have had an effect on the moon immediately. It's ridiculous to think that the moon would wait a half billion years or so before it reacted to these collisions. The only reason evolutionists believe this is because they're committed to their billions of years. But if we look at the evidence without being influenced by evolutionary prejudices, what do we see? We see evidence that cratering rates used to be a lot higher in the past than today. And this affects our understanding of planets and moons all over the solar system. We talked about this during our look at Venus. Remember, Venus's surface looks very young, but evolutionists say it's at least 500 million years old, because cratering is such a slow process. Our moon shows us that cratering is not such a slow process as evolutionists believe. And that means the planets and moons in our solar system are a lot younger than you're being told. As we look at the moon, many people have wondered, how did the moon get here? Where did it come from? Well, the Bible tells us clearly where it came from. It was created on day 4 of Creation Week. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And the evening and the morning were the 4th day.